HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Innovator's Dilemma with a new foreword. When New Technologies Cause Great Firms to Fail. By Clayton M. Christensen. Foreword by Mark Benioff. Read by Jonathan Todd Ross and L.J. Ganser. Foreword. What would Clay say? Countless business leaders have asked that question since the earliest days of what Forbes once called the Christensen era. For me and so many others, Clay Christensen was our guide through waves of technological innovation, from the disk drive, one of his earliest subjects, to the cloud, mobile, social, and beyond. Now we find ourselves at the cusp of what is likely to be the most powerful wave any of us have ever seen. Artificial intelligence. Clay died in 2020, before generative AI burst onto the scene. I miss him very much, and his loss is deeply felt, as we all try to navigate this extraordinary new world. But it is our great fortune that he left us the gift of his books. Clay first published The Innovator's Dilemma in 1997. Timing is a key player in Clay's game-changing theory of disruptive innovation, and the release of this book, his seminal work, was impeccably timed. It was the year Google registered the domain name for its new search engine, the year Steve Jobs returned to Apple and began its historic comeback, and the year AI reared its head as an IBM computer defeated the world's reigning chess champion, Garry Kasparov. The next 25 years would bring the most astonishing and disruptive period of innovation the world had seen. The Innovator's Dilemma captured this story before any of us fully realized it was happening. This was also the time I began thinking about starting the company that 2 years later became Salesforce. I was at Oracle, where I had worked for over a decade, selling enterprise software to big corporations, when I became aware of Clay's book. Being successful with software means continuously seeking the next innovation. After decades in the business, it was clear to me that our industry was facing its own innovator's dilemma, as the world shifted increasingly online. I was carefully tracking the emergence of Amazon and eBay, and could sense that something significant was on the horizon. After a period of intense reflection, and inspired by Clay's insights, I envisioned a new beginning for business software, the end of software as we knew it. Software should get out of the box, literally out of the box that it's sold in, so that customers would no longer need to rely on painstakingly complex on-premise installations and upgrades. I drew from Clay's work in ways both substantive and spiritual. It inspired me to be intrepid as our small team gathered in a one-bedroom rental apartment in San Francisco, prepared to disrupt the software industry and take on the established software giants. We created a radical new cloud-based technology model, the concept of software as a service. We also developed a new business model where we allowed customers to pay as they went via a subscription model instead of all at once. As we began to evangelize Salesforce and acquire customers, we often referred to Clay's book to help explain our view of the industry. At our modest startup headquarters, we worked ourselves ragged under a poster of Albert Einstein. When I started my first business in high school, I also had a poster of Einstein over my desk. Einstein called creative thinking combinatory play, and saw it as the essential feature in productive thought. Clay, too, was fond of quoting Einstein. From his research, Clay found that true innovators prize associating or making surprising connections across diverse areas of knowledge. He believed the key precondition for innovating is actively pursuing diverse new information, and that catalysts to innovation and fresh thinking are questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting. This is the beginner's mind, a spirit of letting go of preconceived notions and seeing the world fresh, that I often speak of in my own work and that I have aspired to maintain inside Salesforce. Over time, it helped enable us to build what is today the third largest enterprise software company in the world. It was also, I am sure, a key part of what attracted Clay to our company and accounted for our bond as he became a supporter and, eventually, through the firm he launched with his son, an investor in Salesforce as well. Among the first major business figures to be inspired by Clay was the legendary Andy Grove of Intel, who called him after reading an early paper he wrote on disruptive innovation. Clay flew to California, where Andy grilled him on what it meant for Intel. Clay insisted on walking Andy through his models, a conversation Andy later said helped Intel regain share and led the company to be more vigilant, always anticipating potential shifts and challenges in the landscape. As Clay later put it, "If I had been suckered into telling Andy Grove what he should think about the microprocessor business, I'd have been killed. But instead of telling him what to think, I taught him how to think, and then he reached what I felt was the correct decision on his own." Shortly after his meeting with Grove, Clay published this book. It was loathed by many of the old-line folks, but it was embraced by the upstarts and quickly found its way into the realm of business classics. For entrepreneurs, the book validated what we instinctively knew was right. Companies that focus too much on sustaining what they have and underestimate disruptive innovations can become dinosaurs. The future isn't just about growing margins and improving on what was already built. It's about being bold enough to make sweeping, dramatic changes. Since publication, The Innovator's Dilemma has sold more than 1.5 million copies. The Economist called it one of the most important business books ever published. It was said to be one of the books on Steve Jobs' Spartan office shelves. Jobs told his biographer, Walter Isaacson, that he was deeply influenced by it, citing Clay's thinking in Apple's relentless push to innovate. Years later, a sign of the staying power of Clay's ideas, Netflix CEO Reed Hastings credited much of the company's success to Clay's writings, distributing the book to his executives, and even holding a retreat to discuss it during Netflix's existential battle with Blockbuster. Of course, Clay was not only about what makes successful companies. He also cared deeply about what makes people successful. Later in his career, he wrote another bestseller, How Will You Measure Your Life? In it, he deploys his theoretical models to the question of how to find happiness in life. It was a radical notion for some of his business school students, trained to focus on more traditional bottom lines. This emphasis on values and living a life filled with meaning, integrity, and purpose was another point of connection between us. Business is about more than driving growth and sustaining success. It's the greatest platform for change, with the potential to improve lives and have a positive impact on the world. Clay understood this deeply. He believed that to be truly successful, each of us must define what we stand for and live by our values. This, more than anything, is Clay's legacy. Mark Benioff, Chair, CEO, and co-founder of Salesforce, and a pioneer of cloud computing.
Introduction. This book is about the failure of companies to stay atop their industries when they confront certain types of market and technological change. It's not about the failure of simply any company, but of good companies, the kinds that many managers have admired and tried to emulate, the companies known for their abilities to innovate and execute. Companies stumble for many reasons, of course, among them bureaucracy, arrogance, tired executive blood, poor planning, short-term investment horizons, inadequate skills and resources, and just plain bad luck. But this book is not about companies with such weaknesses. It is about well-managed companies that have their competitive antennae up, listen astutely to their customers, invest aggressively in new technologies, and yet still lose market dominance. Such seemingly unaccountable failures happen in industries that move fast and in those that move slow, in those built on electronics technology and those built on chemical and mechanical technology, in manufacturing and in service industries. Sears Roebuck, for example, was regarded for decades as one of the most astutely managed retailers in the world. At its zenith, Sears accounted for more than 2% of all retail sales in the United States. It pioneered several innovations critical to the success of today's most admired retailers. For example, supply chain management, store brands, catalog retailing, and credit card sales. The esteem in which Sears management was held shows in this 1964 excerpt from Fortune. How did Sears do it? In a way, the most arresting aspect of its story is that there was no gimmick. Sears opened no big bag of tricks, shot off no skyrockets. Instead, it looked as though everybody in its organization simply did the right thing, easily and naturally. And their cumulative effect was to create an extraordinary powerhouse of a company. Yet no one speaks about Sears that way today. Somehow, it completely missed the advent of discount retailing and home centers. In the midst of today's catalog retailing boom, Sears has been driven from that business. Indeed, the very viability of its retailing operations has been questioned. One commentator has noted that Sears Merchandise Group lost $1.3 billion in 1992, even before a $1.7 billion restructuring charge. Sears let arrogance blind it to basic changes taking place in the American marketplace. Another writer has complained, Sears has been a disappointment for investors who have watched its stock sink dismally in the face of unkept promises of a turnaround. Sears' old merchandising approach, a vast, middle-of-the-road array of mid-priced goods and services, is no longer competitive. No question, the constant disappointments, the repeated predictions of a turnaround that never seems to come, have reduced the credibility of Sears management in both the financial and merchandising communities. It is striking to note that Sears received its accolades at exactly the time, in the mid-1960s, when it was ignoring the rise of discount retailing and home centers, the lower-cost formats for marketing name-brand hard goods that ultimately stripped Sears of its core franchise. Sears was praised as one of the best-managed companies in the world at the very time it let Visa and MasterCard usurp the enormous lead it had established in the use of credit cards in retailing. In some industries, this pattern of leadership failure has been repeated more than once. Consider the computer industry. IBM dominated the mainframe market, but missed by years the emergence of mini-computers, which were technologically much simpler than mainframes. In fact, no other major manufacturer of mainframe computers became a significant player in the mini-computer business. Digital Equipment Corporation created the mini-computer market and was joined by a set of other aggressively managed companies, Data General, Prime, Wang, Hewlett-Packard, and Nixdorf. But each of these companies in turn missed the desktop personal computer market. It was left to Apple Computer, together with Commodore, Tandy, and IBM's standalone PC division, to create the personal computing market. Apple, in particular, was uniquely innovative in establishing the standard for user-friendly computing. But Apple and IBM lagged 5 years behind the leaders in bringing portable computers to market. Similarly, the firms that built the engineering workstation market, Apollo, Sun, and Silicon Graphics, were all newcomers to the industry. As in retailing, many of these leading computer manufacturers were at one time regarded as among the best-managed companies in the world, and were held up by journalists and scholars of management as examples for all to follow. Consider this assessment of Digital Equipment, made in 1986. Taking on Digital Equipment Corporation these days is like standing in front of a moving train. The $7.6 billion computer maker has been gathering speed, while most rivals are stalled in a slump in the computer industry. The author proceeded to warn IBM to watch out, because it was standing on the tracks. Indeed, Digital was one of the most prominently featured companies in the McKinsey study that led to the book In Search of Excellence. Yet, a few years later, writers characterized DEC quite differently. Digital Equipment Corporation is a company in need of triage. Sales are drying up in its key mini-computer line. A 2-year-old restructuring plan has failed miserably. Forecasting and production planning systems have failed miserably. Cost-cutting hasn't come close to restoring profitability. But the real misfortune may be DEC's lost opportunities. It has squandered 2 years trying halfway measures to respond to the low-margin personal computers and workstations that have transformed the computer industry. In Digital's case, as in Sears, the very decisions that led to its decline were made at the time it was so widely regarded as being an astutely managed firm. It was praised as a paragon of managerial excellence at the very time it was ignoring the arrival of the desktop computers that besieged it a few years later. Sears and Digital are in noteworthy company. Xerox long dominated the market for plain paper photocopiers used in large, high-volume copying centers. Yet, it missed huge growth and profit opportunities in the market for small tabletop photocopiers, where it became only a minor player. Although steel mini-mills have now captured 40% of the North American steel market, including nearly all of the region's markets for bars, rods, and structural steel, not a single integrated steel company, American, Asian, or European, had by 1995 built a plant using mini-mill technology. Of the 30 manufacturers of cable-actuated power shovels, only 4 survived the industry's 25-year transition to hydraulic excavation technology. As we shall see, the list of leading companies that failed when confronted with disruptive changes in technology and market structure is a long one. At first glance, there seems to be no pattern in the changes that overtook them. In some cases, the new technologies swept through quickly. In others, the transition took decades. In some, the new technologies were complex and expensive to develop. In others, the deadly technologies were simple extensions of what the leading companies already did better than anyone else. One theme common to all of these failures, however, is that the decisions that led to failure were made when the leaders in question were widely regarded as among the best companies in the world. There are 2 ways to resolve this paradox. One might be to conclude that firms such as Digital, IBM, Apple, Sears, Xerox, and Bucyrus Erie must never have been well managed. Maybe they were successful because of good luck and fortuitous timing, rather than good management. Maybe they finally fell on hard times because their good fortune ran out. Maybe. An alternative explanation, however, is that these failed firms were as well run as one could expect a firm managed by mortals to be, but that there is something about the way decisions get made in successful organizations that sows the seeds of eventual failure. The research reported in this book supports this latter view. It shows that in the cases of well-managed firms, such as those cited above, good management was the most powerful reason they failed to stay atop their industries. Precisely because these firms listened to their customers, invested aggressively in new technologies that would provide their customers more and better products of the sort they wanted, and because they carefully studied market trends and systematically allocated investment capital to innovations that promised the best returns, they lost their positions of leadership. What this implies at a deeper level is that many of what are now widely accepted principles of good management are in fact only situationally appropriate. There are times at which it is right not to listen to customers, right to invest in developing lower performance products that promise lower margins, and right to aggressively pursue small rather than substantial markets. This book derives a set of rules from carefully designed research and analysis of innovative successes and failures in the disk drive and other industries that managers can use to judge when the widely accepted principles of good management should be followed and when alternative principles are appropriate. These rules, which I call principles of disruptive innovation, show that when good companies fail, it often has been because their managers either ignored these principles or chose to fight them. Managers can be extraordinarily effective in managing even the most difficult innovations if they work to understand and harness the principles of disruptive innovation. As in many of life's most challenging endeavors, there is great value in coming to grips with the way the world works, and in managing innovative efforts in ways that accommodate such forces. The Innovator's Dilemma is intended to help a wide range of managers, consultants, and academics in manufacturing and service businesses, high-tech or low, in slowly evolving or rapidly changing environments. Given that aim, technology, as used in this book, means the processes by which an organization transforms labor, capital, materials, and information into products and services of greater value. All firms have technologies. A retailer like Sears employs a particular technology to procure, present, sell, and deliver products to its customers, while a discount warehouse retailer like Price Costco employs a different technology. This concept of technology therefore extends beyond engineering and manufacturing to encompass a range of marketing, investment, and managerial processes. Innovation refers to a change in one of these technologies. The dilemma. To establish the theoretical depth of the ideas in this book, the breadth of their usefulness, and their applicability to the future as well as the past, I have divided this book into two parts. Part 1, chapters 1 through 4, builds a framework that explains why sound decisions by great managers can lead firms to failure. The picture these chapters paint is truly that of an innovator's dilemma. The logical, competent decisions of management that are critical to the success of their companies are also the reasons why they lose their positions of leadership. Part 2, chapters 5 through 10, works to resolve the dilemma. Building on our understanding of why and under what circumstances new technologies have caused great firms to fail, it prescribes managerial solutions to the dilemma, how executives can simultaneously do what is right for the near-term health of their established businesses while focusing adequate resources on the disruptive technologies that ultimately could lead to their downfall. Building a failure framework. I begin this book by digging deep before extending the discussion to draw general conclusions. The first two chapters recount in some detail the history of the disk drive industry, where the saga of good companies hitting hard times has been played out over and over again. This industry is an ideal field for studying failure because rich data about it exist, and because, in the words of Harvard Business School Dean Kim B. Clark, it is fast history. In just a few years, market segments, companies, and technologies have emerged, matured, and declined. Only twice, in the 6 times that new architectural technologies have emerged in this field, has the industry's dominant firm maintained its lead in the subsequent generation. This repetitive pattern of failure in the disk drive industry allowed me first to develop a preliminary framework that explained why the best and largest firms in the early generations of this industry failed, and then to test this framework across subsequent cycles in the industry's history to see whether it was robust enough to continue to explain failures among the industry's more recent leaders. Chapters 3 and 4 then deepen our understanding of why the leading firms stumbled repeatedly in the disk drive industry, and simultaneously test the breadth of the framework's usefulness by examining the failure of firms in industries with very different characteristics. Hence, Chapter 3, exploring the mechanical excavator industry, finds that the same factors that precipitated the failure of the leading disk drive makers also proved to be the undoing of the leading makers of mechanical excavators, in an industry that moves with a very different pace and technological intensity. Chapter 4 completes the framework and uses it to show why integrated steel companies worldwide have proven so incapable of blunting the attacks of the mini-mill steel makers. Why good management can lead to failure. The failure framework is built upon 3 findings from this study. The first is that there is a strategically important distinction between what I call sustaining technologies and those that are disruptive. These concepts are very different from the incremental versus radical distinction that has characterized many studies of this problem. Second, the pace of technological progress can, and often does, outstrip what markets need. This means that the relevance and competitiveness of different technological approaches can change with respect to different markets over time. And third, customers and financial structures of successful companies color heavily the sorts of investments that appear to be attractive to them relative to certain types of entering firms. Sustaining versus disruptive technologies. Most new technologies foster improved product performance. I call these sustaining technologies. Some sustaining technologies can be discontinuous or radical in character, while others are of an incremental nature. What all sustaining technologies have in common is that they improve the performance of established products, along the dimensions of performance that mainstream customers in major markets have historically valued. Most technological advances in a given industry are sustaining in character. An important finding revealed in this book is that rarely have even the most radically difficult sustaining technologies precipitated the failure of leading firms. Occasionally, however, disruptive technologies emerge, innovations that result in worse product performance, at least in the near term. Ironically, in each of the instances studied in this book, it was disruptive technology that precipitated the leading firm's failure. Disruptive technologies bring to a market a very different value proposition than had been available previously. Generally, disruptive technologies underperform established products in mainstream markets, but they have other features that a few fringe and generally new customers value. Products based on disruptive technologies are typically cheaper, simpler, smaller, and frequently more convenient to use. There are many examples, in addition to the personal desktop computer and discount retailing examples cited above. Small off-road motorcycles introduced in North America and Europe by Honda, Kawasaki, and Yamaha were disruptive technologies relative to the powerful over-the-road cycles made by Harley-Davidson and BMW. Transistors were disruptive technologies relative to vacuum tubes. Health maintenance organizations were disruptive technologies to conventional health insurers. In the near future, Internet appliances may become disruptive technologies to suppliers of personal computer hardware and software. Trajectories of market need versus technology improvement. The second element of the failure framework, the observation that technologies can progress faster than market demand, means that in their efforts to provide better products than their competitors and earn higher prices and margins, suppliers often overshoot their market. They give customers more than they need or ultimately are willing to pay for. And more importantly, it means that disruptive technologies that may underperform today, relative to what users in the market demand, may be fully performance competitive in that same market tomorrow. Many who once needed mainframe computers for their data processing requirements, for example, no longer need or buy mainframes. Mainframe performance has surpassed the requirements of many original customers, who today find that much of what they need to do can be done on desktop machines linked to file servers. In other words, the needs of many computer users have increased more slowly than the rate of improvement provided by computer designers. Similarly, many shoppers who in 1965 felt they had to shop at department stores to be assured of quality and selection now satisfy those needs quite well at Target and Walmart. Disruptive technologies versus rational investments. The last element of the failure framework, the conclusion by established companies that investing aggressively in disruptive technologies is not a rational financial decision for them to make, has three bases. First, disruptive products are simpler and cheaper. They generally promise lower margins, not greater profits. Second, disruptive technologies typically are first commercialized in emerging or insignificant markets. And third, leading firms' most profitable customers generally don't want, and indeed initially can't use products based on disruptive technologies. By and large, a disruptive technology is initially embraced by the least.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?